Arguably the most important of the three settings that determine an exposure, which affects the impact of an image, is the depth of field, which is controlled by the aperture. How many things do you want in focus? Well, let's show you an example of how different aperture settings, f-stops, affect a photograph. One of the most important settings that you can actually use of the three to determine exposure is aperture. Aperture basically means how much do we want in focus? Well, in this case, if I want them both in focus, I'm going to have to use a very different aperture than just getting them one in focus. So what we'll do is we'll start by just getting Sarah in focus. We're going to focus on the eye that's closest to the camera, and then just increasing our depth of field, changing our aperture setting to see how far do we have to get them both in focus. If you've never understood aperture settings, this lesson, although fundamental, is very important to, well, how do you want the photograph to look? So we are photographing, let me see here. All right, so we're at 320 speed. Let me actually go here. Let me see here. Okay. We're at 250 speed f1.8 at 200 ISO. Let's take a shot just like that. Hold it there. So Jackson, just really cool peering off that way. That's it, just like that. So you're keeping looking at the camera and you're keeping looking that way. Good, hold it there. Okay, that's at 1.8. Let's now, we're going to go to 2.8. Remember, exposure, give and take. If you want a deeper aperture, a deeper depth of field, then you have to grab the juice from somewhere else. So I'm going to grab it from the ISO. Okay, so right now, in fact, let's just go down a bit there. Beautiful, hold it. Just nice and cool there, Jackson. Just, that's it. That's good, very nice. Hold it. I'm going to keep on going with my depth here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You can see how I've gone to 5.6, but now at 2000 ISO. Good. Now, so now we're at f8 at 4000. Let's have a look. And now let's go at f11. Slight bit of a blink. We'll do that one again. And now let's grab some juice from the speed. And as we said, if you can't just change one thing and say, I want a deeper depth of field and just increase it. You're going to ruin your exposure. As we said with mirrorless, watch what happens with the, you see f11, the f-stop 11. If I say I want to go till 16, that's the maximum aperture on this particular lens, then I need exposure from somewhere else. Well, I'm actually on a tripod. I've got room to play here. And the exposure is pretty damn good here. So I am, let me see, 200 speed at f16. And let me take another shot. Now, obviously my ISO is at 8000. So ignore the grain and the noise in the image. But let's have a look at the difference. Look at Jackson in the background. You see how he's in focus and how he's going less in focus as we keep on going? So there's 1.8, there's 2.8, there's 5.6, there's f8, f11, and then f16. So you just need to work out, if you want to get a deeper depth of field, you have to sacrifice the speed of the ISO to get there. It just depends on what you have. But this was quite dramatic in the sense that we're indoors. Yes, we have some beautiful natural daylight coming through. This will be a lot easier if you wanted this kind of effect in sunlight because we have so much light to play with. We can get a little bit more subtle though. So what I want to do now is I actually want to take a shot of Sarah focusing on her eyes and having her body just sort of drift out of focus in the background. Let's take a look. This is a great way of displaying shallow depth of field and how increasing it can change the look of a photo dramatically. This image here is begging, absolutely begging for a shallow depth of field, but because we have this gorgeous depth and these layers in this particular photograph, if you look at the actual stair rail, the iron bars behind her, you can see how they just drift off out of focus. I'm just creating gorgeous triangles in the particular pose. We've got beautiful natural daylight coming through this window, and I'm using AFC, continuous focus. The camera is going to be continuously focusing while on auto area AF. To simplify that, if you fast forwarded to this particular chapter and haven't seen anything else, the camera is focusing on the face. And in this case, it's actually saying to me, you know what, I'm focusing on the eye that's close to the camera. If you want to choose the other one, you can. But for the moment, we're going to allow the camera to do the focusing. This is more about aperture than any other settings that we have on camera. So you'd be tempted to look at everything else, but don't. Right now, we're shooting at a speed at 2/50th, 1.2, 64 ISO. Chin up a little bit last minute there for me. Gorgeous, love your look there, stunning. Bit of a blink, we'll do one more. Gorgeous. All right, that's at 1.2. Absolutely gorgeous. Now, what we'll do, we'll move the aperture and go a little bit deeper and just keep on going and see how it affects the photograph, how it affects the material on her dress and the stair rails in the background. So, okay, so 2 stops from my aperture. So it's basically 8 clicks, which is actually a little bit more than 2 stops, but that's okay. Okay, so let's do that. In fact, it's just gone a little bit brighter here, so let's just bring that juice down a little bit, chin up a little bit, and turn your face this way. Always remember too that your aperture is also going to affect the quality of your highlights. Like highlights in the background of an out of focus image just sort of blends in a little bit. It almost makes you feel like the exposure is a little bit different. So what we're going to do, we're going to increase the aperture by eye and then change the ISO to what we believe is a good exposure simply by looking at the photograph and saying, does it look good? Now let's increase that aperture. Okay. Good, hold it. Let's go again. Every time I click, it's a 3rd stop increment. And now let's have a look at the difference. Okay, look at the stair rail in the background. Look at the quality of the dress. Look at everything in focus in the background. And then as we tighten up that focus, look how the stair rail and the banister there, they sort of disappear. Not only are they disappearing in focus, the size of the bars are diminishing. And that is dramatically different. So look at the difference between at f1.2, and let's keep on going down and have a look. Crazy, right? Now in this context, I much prefer the 1.2, but it's a great way of explaining aperture. And just remember, play with that setting. Don't always leave the camera on program mode and just hope that you get a great shot. This is an easy way to make your shots stand out and look really cool and dramatic. An understanding of shutter speed is necessary to achieve your desired result. Do you want to freeze motion and have your subject or object super sharp, or do you want some elements blurry or specifically capture the motion? When you handhold a camera, you first want to determine what a safe handheld shutter speed is. That will freeze your motion and your movement even if you're photographing a stationary subject. Now, some photographers can handhold their cameras up to half a second and still be sharp or even more, but why play with fire and risk camera blur in some of your shots? I personally typically use a speed of about 250th of a second when photographing subjects that aren't moving.
Now, some people use a 60th of a second, or 125th of a second seems to be a popular speed that most people use. As you increase the focal length of your lens, which we'll discuss later on in the course, you want to increase your speed, as that will also help you safely be still enough to not let your movement adversely affect your photographs. You can also shoot with a tripod, of course, and that can help you photograph with a slower shutter speed. Now, there is a correct way and an incorrect way to hold your camera. Now, when you first get your camera, you'll sort of just hold it organically, and you'll sort of hold it like this. And of course, you know to grip the camera in your hand, and you'll depress the shutter. Hopefully you're right-handed, because I believe most, if not all, cameras are right-handed. And sometimes I see photographers or hobbyists, semi-pros, whatever, sort of hold their camera like this. So if you're using an autofocus camera and autofocus lens, this might actually manually focus the lens. So if you, by you holding the weight of the camera like this, you might actually make your shots out of focus by doing this. If you have a zoom lens, well, you can zoom it like this, but it's a little bit weird. Like, you're holding the weight of the camera and you're doing all the technical stuff with the same hand. So my suggestion is support the camera. Think of it like the brawn and brains. The brawn is actually holding the weight of the camera. It's being distributed evenly. And this is the brains. This is actually doing the work. So you can do the shutter speed, you can do whatever you basically want, but this is how you do it. Now, if you're holding the camera vertically, you are going to hold the weight of the camera like this, and you will take a shot. Some professional cameras actually can have a vertical grip, which makes it quite comfortable as well. But my suggestion is take the weight off the camera, do it like this, give yourself every chance. Also, if you want to shoot with a slower shutter speed as well, maybe you're forced to, depending on the environment, and you don't have a tripod, you might want to bring your arms really close into you, bring it right in, support your body weight, and then breathe in, breathe out, and then slowly depress the shutter. You might watch Westerns like I do. I love watching Westerns, and I'll say squeeze the trigger on a handgun, for example. Squeeze the trigger rather than do this, because that motion might actually cause movement, and you think that perhaps your lens is out of focus, but it could be your camera blur. So take your time, learn the very simple skill of putting the weight in your camera and letting the other hand do all the work. When you've worked out a safe handheld shutter speed for yourself, you then have to determine a shutter speed that will freeze the motion of whatever you're photographing. So if you're photographing a sport like tennis, for example, you probably get that I'm a tennis fan, you find the fastest motion like serving or hitting a forehand or a backhand, and you may have to set a shutter speed of maybe 2,000th or 4,000th of a second to freeze that motion. A person walking, running, throwing a ball, car racing, whatever it is, require different speeds to freeze the motion. So keep on testing with your subject, and once you've frozen the motion at the peak of that speed of that motion, you can comfortably shoot and safely have sharp and still subjects or objects in your image. Now, you may deliberately want to slow down your shutter speed or capture the motion blur. The easiest example that I could give is photographing, say, a waterfall, where the water looks all misty and dreamy. Now, here's an example of me using a slow shutter speed to deliberately blur my wedding couple to add mystery and add to the abstract nature of this particular scene. Keep in mind that if you're using an on-camera flash, which is also known as a speed light, your shutter speed cannot exceed 200th of a second unless you've activated high-speed sync. I don't believe that it's important at this stage of our conversation to go into too much detail about that, because it's probably going to confuse you. Now, the Nikon Z8, for example, can shoot as fast as 32,000th of a second all the way up to 15 minutes, but you can also add the bulb setting, which can be a longer exposure as long as you keep your finger depressed on the shutter button. Now, there is a time option that works by pressing the shutter button once to start the exposure and then once again to stop it. So you can go for as long as you want. So be mindful that the bulb and the time options are only available in the manual mode, at least in the Nikon camera system, not too sure about other ones. Now let's put this theory into practice and show you a couple of examples of shutter speed and how it works in the real world.
So it'd be very easy for me to display a slow shutter speed in a typical environment like a waterfall where you show the movement of the water, and that's totally fine. We can also do that in other situations. I thought it'd be fun to show you a creative way of using a slow shutter speed. In other words, we're allowing more time for that light to hit to the sensor, and we're creating that beautiful blur. So Sarah, what I want you to do is I want you to peer off, beautiful sort of mystery there with your eyes. That's gorgeous. That's it. We're shooting now on AFC, so it's continuously focusing on her eye. Auto area AF, so the camera is choosing her eye and continuously helping me out. I'm shooting on the lowest ISO. In fact, let me do this. F2 at 25th of a second. So what you're going to do, Sarah, is you are going to twirl the umbrella really quickly. Now be careful because it might get caught up in your hair. And then you'll start crying, and that won't be nice. Tilt it up so a bit more light hits your face, the other way. There you go. Turn your face up to the light a bit more. Gorgeous. Okay, hold it there. So keep your face perfectly sharp where it is, and we're going to blur it. In fact, yeah, let's do that. Ready, fast, go now. Whoop. So, 1 second, we'll start again. So now that you know how it sort of works and the feeling of it, so try to keep it stationary but moving right where you are. Ready, go for it. Fast, 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 fast. Look at that beautiful blur of the umbrella. It looks absolutely gorgeous. Very easy way to create a beautiful mood and mystery. What I'm not really enjoying is it almost feels like a hat. So I feel like I want to bring it around her and frame her a little bit. So bring it up a little bit higher and then tilt it this way. Tilt it this way. Good. A bit more here. Like, there you go. Perfect. Good. Allow that light to hit your face there. Now do me a favor. Come back a few little shuffles this way. Good. Bring your hands a little bit lower. So let this, and let it tilt up a little bit. So bring your hands right down to the bottom. There you go. And then tilt it a bit more up so a bit more light hits your face. That's it. Move your face forward. There you go. Gorgeous. Beautiful. Go as fast as you can. Wait a second. When you're ready, go for it. Mystery, beautiful face. Now it's still in the back of you. Let me just do this. What I want you to do is go about there. There we go. I don't mind the fact that I'll see your hands blurring a little bit. Adds a bit of mystery, but keep your face perfectly sharp. In fact, I might shoot this vertically. And that's just framing you beautifully. Gorgeous. Okay, when you're ready, go for it. Okay, let's have a look. And then eyes back at me. And see how your hand is there. Bring that one up a little bit higher and soften it a little bit there for me. That's gorgeous. Bring the arm off the body, slight touch. Gorgeous. Ready, fast, go for it. Love that. Oh, look at that, beautiful. It's perfectly sharp. She's being framed by the umbrella. Gives us that soft and mystical quality, and a great way of showing how a slow shutter speed could really affect your image in a beautiful way.
We established earlier in the course that ISO is the camera's sensitivity to the light. The less light we have available, the higher the ISO needs to be. The more light we have available, the lower the ISO, which will give us better quality. Now let's take a look at the same shot with different ISO settings and compare them, and then we can all see the difference.
We're shooting at 80 ISO, almost the lowest ISO that this camera can handle. So great quality, 250 speed f2, but 80 ISO. So let's take this shot. Just turn your face this way. Okay, so keep your face there, and your eyes, just keep them in the exact same spot. So look at eye level in the corner of that room. I know this is really boring for you, mate, but hang in there, just really, really cool. I'm gonna take the same shot in many different ways. Okay, hold it there, really cool. Okay, so now, ISO. So at 320 speed f2 at 100 ISO, let's take one shot like that. Turn your face a little bit this way. That's it. Give me a hint of a squint with your eyes. Chin down a little bit. That's it. Hold it there. Good. All right. So now, third stop increments. Hold it there. Great. Remember how exposure is give and take. As I'm basically increasing the ISO, I have to adjust either my shutter speed or my aperture to get the same look. So I'm increasing my ISO, but I'm increasing my speed. I have to. Okay. Hold it there. Let's keep on going with our ISO. 6400 ISO. 1/20,000th of a second. Crazy, right? I've reached a limit in the ceiling of my speed, so I have to increase my aperture. I'm at 25,600 ISO, and again I've reached the ceiling of my speed, so I'm increasing my aperture. And I think that's as far as we'll go. So 32,000th of a second f4.5 and high ISO 1, which is something ridiculous. So it just goes to show you that exposure is not just some arbitrary combination of numbers that don't mean anything. We established earlier in the course that the three things in terms of shutter speed, aperture, and ISO affect the way the actual photograph looks. Your ISO, always remember, is the gas in the tank. How much light do we have and how much latitude do we have with the ISO? Now I want you to also remember this. If you're photographing, whether it's in manual mode, program mode, aperture priority, shutter priority, you can also put the ISO to auto ISO. In other words, the camera is going to determine that. So let me show you how that works. All right, so let's say, for example, I want to shoot at 250 speed. Okay, so I'm at 250 and I want to shoot at maybe f2. You can see how it's completely overexposed where he's blown out. It's literally, it looks stark white. But what I'm going to do here is, you see how I press my ISO button and I click on ISO. Very quickly, it just snapped into place. Why? Because it is actually choosing what it believes to be a correct exposure and the correct ISO with a combination of speed and aperture. So let's turn your face this way, eyes back at me just for the sake of the argument here. Hold it there. So as you can see here, we're at 250 speed f2 and the camera has chosen an ISO of 72. In other words, we've actually determined the exposure manually, but we're letting the camera doing the thinking for the ISO. So if you look at the actual, the exposure dial there, it's minus and 0 and plus, then of course that's not going to change because it'll always deem it to be a good exposure. As I increase my speed, as I change my aperture, things won't change. Now what you can do with your camera settings, depending on the camera system that you own, you can say, I want auto ISO, but do not exceed 10,000 ISO. And then it'll actually reach the ceiling and it may cause over or under exposure depending on the settings that you actually have. So remember, auto ISO can be a really decent setting that you can have where the camera does a little bit of the thinking. Remember though, in the previous parts of our course, that if you do photograph a very dark subject or object against a dark background or something very bright on a bright background, then it'll be confused. So you have to think of the way the camera thinks and adjust accordingly. With the great thing about mirrorless cameras is that you can see live exposure. As you're changing settings, you're seeing them live. So don't worry about the science behind it. Does it look good? Do we have detail in the brightest highlight in the face? And you know you've nailed it. But auto ISO is a very good one. If I'm going to let the camera do any of the thinking, rather than put the camera on a personal level, on aperture priority or shutter priority, or even program, I like to drive the car manually, so to speak, and shoot on the manual setting. Occasionally I might shoot auto ISO because maybe I'm shooting an event or I'm shooting a party or something where I'm shooting in sunlight, I'm shooting in backlight, and I need that flexibility. That's okay. So there you go. That's how it works in action. As you can see, we've got a hot card warning. Ignore that. We're in 110-degree heat here, and that's okay. I often think it actually gives me a premature warning, but not a problem whatsoever. I've got Sarah in full sun right now, and I'm sort of emulating what we often refer to as bokeh. You've probably heard that before. What does bokeh mean? People believe that it's actually just the out of focus bits. Well, yes and no. Bokeh refers to the contrasty highlights in the background of an image that have specular highlights. These highlights contrasted with something darker, like a shadow. So if you see the background there, it's actually that bush there that's out of focus. It's like a lavender tree, I think. It's out of focus. And we've got some highlights on there. So I've blown her hair over her face. She looks amazing. Love that. Gorgeous. Hold it. Just peer off this way. Shoulder up a little bit. Gorgeous. You'll often notice that I actually crop into the hairline. I have no problem doing that. If I was to crop above the hair, we've got too much information. If I crop really, really close, that might be a bit of an issue as well. But into the hairline, that's been popularized for decades. I have no problem in doing it. But as you can see, we've got this beautiful, gorgeous sort of feeling of light there. Love that. And let's just get the wind going there. Okay, go for it. Go really close. There you go. That's it. And eyes at me. Beautiful. So you can see it was funny because my camera wasn't locked on my tripod and it was sinking and I had to sort of correct it. But this is where I might shoot more than I normally would. I nailed the shot pretty quickly, but if you start looking back at the shots, you sort of see that configuration, that beautiful movement. That eye is perfectly sharp and that background is all creamy and beautiful. And that, I mean, you'll get with a prime lens like the 85mm f1.2. So when you're shooting in full sun, of course, you have to bring your ISO right down. You've got too much juice, actually, from the sun. So check this out. We're at an 85mm f1.2 lens. I want a shallow depth of field. I want less things in focus. I'm going to focus on the eye that's closest to the camera. So if I go to f1.2, I'm at 64 ISO. It is actually the optimum quality from this particular camera. I've got a couple of notches left to go, but when you're shooting in full sun, fully expect you're gonna have to bring your ISO all the way down. So 64 ISO f1.2, which means that I have to crank up my speed. Remember, exposure is give and take. Sarah, just bring your hair off a little bit again, and then a touch more this way. That's gorgeous, good. That's beautiful. Eyes at me. Beautiful. Eyes that way. Gorgeous. Beautiful. Look how sharp that is. I like the angle. It's actually giving me that beautiful sort of, that shallow depth there. And the reason how the angle relates to that light and that shallow depth, because I've got the leading lines of that concrete. You've got the plane of focus right where her eye is. And it just looks really, really beautiful. So remember, you're out in full sun. You have to bring the ISO all the way down. So you'll notice that when you're indoors and it's getting darker and it's later, that you have to crank that ISO up. Now on me, there's a light just so that you can see me as I'm basically teaching into the camera. But I want to use the lighting that's actually as a result of a sculpture that's being uplit. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick a pose or a reason or an excuse for her to actually turn her face into the light. Now the lighting is coming from down low. This is a really important one. If it's coming from down low and she just keeps her face upwards, we're going to get some unflattering shadows on the upper cheekbones. So Sarah's gorgeous, but we're not flattering her with this particular lighting. So we need to give her an excuse to turn her face to the light and bring her chin down. So we'll do that. And quite simply, that's exactly what we can do. Let's turn your body towards, like on the side there. And then, yep. And then now what I want you to do is bring your hands just like that. Actually, bring them on your side because I want to crop close. Lean forward and chin right down and turn your face towards that sculpture. So now all your hair, bring it on that side for me. That's it. And let the result of that light, there you go, that's beautiful. Just stay there for me. Gorgeous. Okay, beautiful. So that quality of light is really pretty. Now let's see this for a moment. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to put the white balance on tungsten because I have this LED light on a warm tone. So I need to clean that light up a little bit. You can see how straight away it did that. Now, I am using a very fast lens, 1.2, which means that my ISO can be perhaps a little bit lower than normal in a situation like this. But let's say if I was at 2.8, okay, so maybe an aperture of a lens that maybe you have in your camera bag right now. So what we need to do is, well, let's go to 250 speed, 2.8, and you can see that, of course, when you're indoors, you got to crank the ISO up. Okay, so let's do that. You can see how far I have to go to get a reasonable shot here. Now, turn your face so that I'm pretty much photographing your profile. So chin down, but let the hair flow, like let the gravity take its course. There you go. Gorgeous, and then eyes down. Actually, look up a little bit and to your left. Or too far. Look at the corner of that little area that you're in, the corner. That's it, chin down. Lean your chin forward like a turtle. And then just relax your hair. Just run your fingers through your hair so you get rid of those little stringy bits. There we go. Just one more time there. So I am going to go pinpoint focus so I can really focus on the glass of the eye. Look a little bit to your left again. That's it. And then chin down, forward like a turtle. And then chin down again. Good, beautiful. And then look a little bit lower with your eyes. There you go. Give me a hint of a squint, add a bit of mystery. That's gorgeous. Hold it there. So there you go, guys. 6400 ISO. You may have seen on a blog or on YouTube or someone saying that you can't shoot with that high ISO. Well, of course you can. What's the payoff? Well, of course, we've mentioned in an earlier part of this course that when you crank up the ISO, you get a bit more noise and a bit more grain. It's like we likened it to our eyes, that as we get older, we see less quality. Now, it's more than forgivable. If you're using the current crop of cameras, then when you crank up the ISO that much, it's not really a problem. We saw in an earlier demonstration that when we crank it up to a ridiculous ISO, it's going to look a bit sandy, but you can't have everything. Remember, we talked about exposure, give and take. Once you have similar lighting, if you want to increase one or you have to decrease the other, we have a similar amount of water. When the lighting changes, in this situation, there's no light left, well, we need to compromise, which means we're going to crank up the ISO. If we wanted to, we could lower the shutter speed and lower. So let's do this. We can go to 1.2. We can photograph at a 60th of a second, which means that we can get our ISO down quite dramatically. So it really depends on the payoff. So turn your face to the right a little bit more. Chin down a little bit more. Good. And eyes a little bit to your left again. That's gorgeous. Hold it there. So look at that. And now it's quite negligible, the difference when you think about it. 6400 ISO as opposed to 640 ISO. So great quality camera can make all the difference, but remember, you see a pocket of light, use it, and if you're indoors, just expect you're going to crank up the ISO, and that's okay.
There are mainly two file types that hold the data of your image. One is called a RAW file and the other is a JPEG, which I'm sure you're familiar with. So think of a RAW file as a dish like a lasagna. You have all the ingredients to make it, but you can add and subtract the ingredients, of course, to your taste. The dish is in front of you, but it hasn't been made or baked yet. So a raw file full of data and yet to be processed. It's the most amount of information, it's more flexible and is a larger file and can be manipulated a lot easier in post-productions like Photoshop and Adobe's Lightroom and Capture One and things like that. A JPEG is an already prepared and made lasagna. Yes, you can add salt and pepper or any other condiments, but there is only so much you can do once it's already made. So a JPEG file is an already processed file. It's a compressed file, has less information. It's a smaller file, but it's more compatible with most devices. Now, if you over or underexpose or don't use the proper white balance when shooting a JPEG, of course it can be a problem. It's a simpler workflow though, and if you're just starting out, my recommendation is to start with just JPEG. As you get more sophisticated, you may want to shoot RAW and JPEG. So you can enjoy the JPEG now, and if you want to go back and have more latitude to manipulate the dish, so to speak, you can go back to the RAW file and have fun processing it with different software. Now, most professional cameras have two memory card slots. You can shoot RAW files on both cards or JPEGs on both card slots. You can also just shoot on one card, or if you have two cards, you can use a second card as an overflow. So when one card fills up, it saves the photographs in the second card slot. So why shoot on two cards at the same time? Well, no memory cards or hard drives are flawless. For redundancy, if you shoot with two cards and if one card fails, the other gives you a backup option. It's very simple. Personally, I like to shoot RAW files on one card and JPEGs on the other. Why? Because if the RAW files are corrupt, I at least have the JPEGs to fall back on. I also can view and share the JPEGs instantly without the need to process them.